The dog had been barking at the old well for 3 days. Not at anything that lived above ground. Just down into the black, like something down there needed to be heard. The woman who owned the 40 acres had tied him, soaked him, told him there was nothing but stone and old water. He had chewed the rope and gone back. She had stopped arguing with him by the third dawn. She pulled on her boots in the dark. The sky was the color of a bruise before it heals. She walked to the well without a lantern. The dog stood at the edge, no longer frantic. Just waiting. She knelt, pressed her ear to the planks. For a long moment there was only wind and the dog's breathing. Then 3 knocks rose from 15 feet below. Slow. Even. Patient, a voice followed, low and rough and alive. "I've been waiting for you to come." The woman did not move. Her hand stayed flat on the wood. The dark beneath her had just answered back. The first morning, Nora thought Grit had lost his mind. The second morning, she thought maybe she had. The third morning, she stopped thinking and started listening. Nora Bassett was not a woman people overlooked. 6 feet and 2 inches in her work boots, shoulders like a barn door. Hands that could haul a hay bale one-handed, and had more than once, just to prove nobody right about anything. She was 38 years old, and she had been managing 40 acres of Nevada territory on her own for 3 years, and she did not have time for a dog who had decided, without consultation, that the old well in the southwest corner of the property was the most important thing in the world. The well had been sealed since, before her father bought the land, rotting wooden planks, iron ring, the smell of dark water somewhere far below. Nothing anyone had used in living memory. Nothing worth looking at twice. Grit disagreed. He was not a handsome dog. One ear pointed straight up, one flopped sideways, as if it had given up halfway through. His coat was the color of a storm cloud that couldn't decide whether to rain. He weighed about 40 pounds, and he had opinions about everything, and he expressed them loudly, and at length and at 5 in the morning, he stood at the edge of that well, and he barked. Not at rabbits, not at coyotes, not at the wind, at the well down into the darkness, urgent, relentless. The kind of bark that said, "I know something. Why won't you listen to me? I know something. Day 1. Nora tied him to the porch post with a good rope. He chewed through it in 40 minutes. She found him back at the well, barking, with a length of rope still hanging from his collar like a very small, very determined escape artist. Day 2, she threw a bucket of cold water over him. He shook himself off, looked at her with one ear up and one flopped sideways, and barked. She tried reasoning with him, which was already a sign that things had gone sideways, because she was a grown woman standing in a field at dawn talking sense to a dog. "There is nothing down there," she told him. "I have looked. There is nothing." Grit barked. "You are embarrassing both of us." Grit barked. She went back inside and made coffee and told herself she was not going to look at the well. She looked at the well every 4 minutes for the rest of the day. Day 3, she woke up before the barking started. She lay in the dark and listened to the silence and thought, something is wrong, not with the dog, with the silence. It was the wrong kind of quiet, too still, like the moment before a thing happens. Then Grit started, but different this time. Not the relentless, frustrated bark of an animal who isn't being heard. Something shorter, sharper, like punctuation. 3 barks, a pause, 3 barks, a pause, like he was counting. Nora sat up. She pulled on her boots without lacing them. Coat over her nightgown. She had a lantern, but she didn't bother lighting it yet, because the sky was just starting to go from black to the deep blue that comes before dawn, and she could see well enough to walk. Grit was at the well. He heard her coming, and he stopped barking. That was the thing that made her stomach drop. He stopped, and he looked at her, and then he looked at the well, and then he looked at her again. Not frantic anymore, pawsied her, like he'd been waiting for her to finally show up. Fine, Nora thought. Fine. She knelt beside the well and pressed her ear against the rotting planks. Nothing whined through the sage. Grit's breathing. The distant sound of her horse shifting in the barn. She was about to stand. She was about to go inside and have a second cup of coffee and write off the whole thing as a dog who'd gone peculiar in his old age. Then, 3 slow knocks. From below, then a pause, then 3 more. Deliberate. Even. Like someone who had knocked many times already and had learned to be patient about it. Nora's hand went flat against the wood. She held her breath. "Hello?" she called down. Her voice dropped into the darkness and the stone walls caught it and sent pieces of it back. "Is someone down there?" The silence that followed was the longest 10 seconds of her life. Then a voice came up from the deep, tired. Rough at the edges, like a door that needed oiling. Female. Old enough to have some years in it. "Yes," the voice said. "I've been waiting for you to come." Nora yanked the planks away with her bare hands, 3 of them, 4, crumbling at the edges, the wood so old it came apart in sheets. The smell that rose from below was cold, still water and something else she couldn't name. Not decay, just age. The smell of a place that had been closed a long time. She held the lantern over the opening. 15 feet down, on a narrow ledge of stone where the wall had eroded unevenly over decades, sat a woman, 58, perhaps. Hard to know for certain. 20 years of living carefully had put its own kind of age on her. White hair pulled back from a face that was dirty and drawn but entirely composed. Her dress was torn along the left side. Her left ankle was swollen in a way that meant business. She sat with her back against the stone wall, and her hands folded in her lap, like she was waiting in a parlor. She looked up into the light without blinking dark eyes. Steady. The kind of eyes that had looked at hard things for a long time and kept looking anyway. "You're Silas Bassett's daughter," the woman said. Not a question. Nora stared down at her. "How long have you been down there?" 3 days. 3 days. The same. 3 days Grit had been barking. Nora looked at the dog. Grit looked back with profound dignity, as if to say, "I told you so." Repeatedly. "How did you get down there?" "Rope," the woman said. "I came down on a rope to retrieve something from this ledge. The rope gave out before I could secure it for the climb. Back. My ankle turned on the landing." Nora sat back on her heels, looked at the well, looked at the woman, looked at the distance. 15 feet. Narrow ledge. Swollen ankle. 3 days. "Can you put any weight on that foot?" "Some, not enough to climb." "I have rope in the barn, I know," the woman said. "Your father kept rope in the barn too." Left side, 3rd hook from the door. Nora stood up, slowly, stared down. "How do you know where my father kept his rope?" The woman looked up at her with those dark, steady eyes. "Because he showed me," she said. 20 years ago, when he was helping me disappear." Nora got the rope, 3rd hook from the door. Left side. Exactly where the woman said. She stood in the barn for a moment, with the rope in her hands and Grit pressed against her leg, and she thought, "I should be more alarmed by this." And then, "I am alarmed. I'm just not showing it because I was raised not to show it, and now I can't tell anymore if I'm calm, or just very good at pretending." She rigged the rope through the old iron ring on the well frame, made a loop at the bottom, wide enough to sit in, tested the knot 3 times. She was strong enough to haul baled hay. She could manage a woman, even a woman with a bad ankle, even 15 feet of rope in the dark. "I'm lowering a loop," she called down. "Get both legs through it. Sit in it like a swing. I'll pull slow." "Understood," came the voice from below. Instructions, not requests. Nora noticed that. She lowered the rope, felt the weight shift when the woman settled into the loop, started pulling, hand over hand, steady and even. The way you do any job that requires more strength than hurry. 3 minutes, and then two hands appeared at the edge of the well, gripping the stone, and Nora grabbed both wrists and pulled. The woman came up over the lip of the well, and Nora set her down on the ground beside it, and for a moment they were both just breathing. The sky had gone from deep blue to the gray pink of early morning. Light enough now to see clearly. The woman sat on the ground and stretched her injured leg carefully and looked around the property. At the barn, at the house, at the mountains behind it, at the well she'd just come out of. She breathed in, slow, deep, like someone tasting air that had been unavailable for a long time. Then she looked at Nora. "Constance Aldermore," she said. "Though I've been called other things for 20 years." Nora knew that name. Of course she knew that name. Everyone in Dullwater County knew that name. The Aldermore family had owned half the territory before everything fell apart. Harold Aldermore had built the largest cattle operation in Nevada Territory in the 1850s, and his daughter Constance had died in the summer of 1860. A fall from a horse, they said. Tragic, young. Only 38 at the time. There was a grave marker on the edge of what used to be Aldermore land. Nora had ridden past it, twice a year maybe. Never thought much about it. "Constance Aldermore is dead," Nora said carefully. "That grave is empty," the woman said. "I put it there. I needed people to stop looking for me. People were looking for you, one person." "Which was enough," she said it simply. "No drama in it. The way you say a fact that stopped being shocking a long time ago." Nora looked at her injured ankle. Already swelling worse, now that the adrenaline of being lifted out of a 15-foot hole was wearing off. "Come inside," Nora said. "I'll wrap that." She sat Constance at the kitchen table, heated water, found the clean cloth she used for bandaging, poured 2 cups of coffee, without asking because it was barely past dawn, and some questions answer themselves. Constance wrapped both hands around her cup and didn't speak while Nora worked on the ankle. Swollen, not broken, the bones moved right when Nora pressed carefully, and the woman's jaw tightened but she didn't make a sound. A bad sprain. A week off it, minimum, if she was lucky. Nora wrapped it tight and sat back and looked at the woman across her kitchen table, Constance Aldermore. Alive. In her kitchen. Having coffee, at 6:15 in the morning, on a Tuesday. "You said my father helped you disappear," Nora said. "He did when?" "Summer of 1860, July. The night everything went wrong. Nora's father had died 5 years ago. She was 33 when it happened. She'd come home from buying seed in the next town and found him on the floor of the kitchen. The doctor said fever, fast and complete. Here one day, gone before she could get back. She had grieved and buried him, and taken over the farm, and not stopped moving since because stopping meant feeling it, and feeling it meant she might not start again. My father never told me anything about this, Nora said. He wouldn't have, Constance said. He was protecting you. The less you knew, the safer you were. For safer from what? Constance set down her coffee cup. From Reginald Foss, she said. And what he does to people who know too much. Reginald Foss, Nora let the name sit in the air between them. Reginald Foss ran the first territorial bank in Dullwater. He had run it for 22 years. He was 64 years old and he had silver hair and expensive clothes, and he donated money to the church and paid for the new schoolhouse roof 2 winters ago, and he sat in the front pew every Sunday and shook hands. Afterward, with the particular warmth of a man who understood that warmth, applied correctly, was a form of currency. He was the most respected man in Dullwater County. He had sent Nora a letter of condolence when Calvin died. She had it somewhere. She had kept it because it was kind, she thought. She looked at Constance across the table. Tell me, she said, and Constance did. Not all at once. Not in a straight line. The way a person tells a thing they've carried alone for 20 years. In pieces. Checking the weight of each piece before setting it down, watching the other person's face to see how much they can hold. Harold Aldermore had built his cattle empire honestly. Fair wages. Kept his word. When the railroad surveyors came through in 1858, he refused to sell his southern grazing land because he knew the water access on his property was worth more than what they were offering, and he knew the railroad would figure that out eventually, and he was content to wait. Reginald Foss was not content to wait. Foss had arrived in Dullwater in 1855 with seed money from somewhere back east that he never discussed. He built the bank. He cultivated relationships. He was patient in the way that certain men are patient, not because they don't want things quickly, but because they understand that visible patience is its own kind of weapon. By 1858, Foss wanted the Aldermore water rights, Harold Aldermore said no. By 1859, Foss had begun the paperwork, forged signatures, adjusted land surveys, minor changes to recorded boundaries, small enough to go unnoticed individually, significant enough to matter when taken together. By early 1860, Harold Aldermore noticed. By July 1860, Harold Aldermore was dead. Constance stopped there. Not from hesitation. Just to let it land, Nora said. How? It looked like a riding accident, Constance said. He was found on the South Trail. His horse came back without him. The sheriff said the horse must have spooked, but my father was the best rider in the territory. He had ridden that trail in the dark, in the rain, in weather that would keep anyone else indoors. His horse didn't spook. The kitchen was quiet, morning light coming through the window now. Full and clear. What happened after, Nora said. Foss came to me 3 days after the funeral. Very respectful, very sorry for my loss. He had papers. My father's signature was on them. On documents I had never seen, that my father had never shown me, because my father had never signed them. Transfer of grazing rights, adjusted boundaries. Everything that would make the ranch vulnerable. You went to the sheriff. I went to the sheriff. A pause. The sheriff told me I was confused by grief. Another pause. I was not confused by grief, Constance said. I was furious, which is different. And significantly more useful. Grit had come inside at some point and was now lying under the table with his chin on Constance's good foot, as if he had appointed himself her personal warm thing. As Constance looked down at him, something moved across her face. Quiet, private, smart dog, she said. He has opinions, Nora said. About everything, I noticed. 3 days, Nora said. He barked for 3 days. I heard him every morning, Constance said, from the ledge. I'd knock back when he paused. 3 times, so he'd know it wasn't an echo. She looked at Grit. He understood. I could tell he understood. He'd wait and then bark again, like he was telling me, someone's coming, someone's coming. Keep going. Nora looked at the dog. 40 pounds of common sense, she said. More than most men twice his size, Constance agreed. Why did you come back, Nora asked. After 20 years. Why now? Constance was quiet for a moment. Because the railroad is moving, she said. The route has been decided. Not officially, there's no announcement. But I've been watching from a distance for 2 years, and the land acquisition pattern is clear. Foss has been buying up parcels around the water sources. Quietly, through other names and shell arrangements, the route runs through what used to be my family's land. And then, she stopped, looked at Nora, and then it runs along your southern fence line, she said. 40 feet of it. But the route isn't the thing that matters. Then what matters? Constance set both hands flat on the table. Your well, she said. The old well, the sealed one. It sits above an underground spring. I know, because my father's surveyor mapped it in 1856, and your father showed me those maps when he helped me plan where to hide the documents. That spring connects to the main aquifer, and it surfaces at exactly the right point for a steam engine water stop. She met Nora's eyes. Without access to your well, the nearest viable water source for the railroad is 28 miles in either direction. Your 40 acres of hardscrabble Nevada land is the most valuable water rights in this section of the territory. Nora sat very still. She looked at the window, at the well, just visible from here. The one she'd never thought about twice. The one with the rotting cover that she'd been meaning to replace for 3 years. He doesn't just want your evidence, Nora said slowly. He wants my land. He's been positioning for it, Constance said. Everything around you. He's bought it, or pressured it, or inherited it through arrangement C when less you were looking. You're the last piece. The coffee was cold. Neither of them had noticed. And the documents, Nora said. The ones you came back to retrieve. My father hid them in the well. On the ledge, Constance said. He showed me the spot before I left. He said he'd keep them safe. He spent 20 years keeping them safe. And then, she stopped, Nora said, and then he died. Yes, Constance said, and then he died. The word died sat between them. Nora looked at her hands. At the table, at the window. I want to show you some, she said. She had found it 3 years ago, when she was replacing mortar on the fireplace after Calvin died. A loose brick, second row from the left, at the height you'd reach without thinking. She'd pulled it out expecting to find nothing, an air pocket, an old nest, and found instead a folded piece of paper wrapped in oilcloth. She'd read it, write it twice, put it back. She didn't know what to do with it then. She still didn't know what to do with it. So she'd left there because leaving a thing in a wall was not the same as ignoring it. It was more like keeping it available, in case a day came when she understood why it was there. She understood now. She went to the fireplace and pulled the brick, unwrapped the oilcloth, unfolded the paper, handed it to Constance. The letter was in Silas Bassett's handwriting. Neat and deliberate, the way he wrote everything, like a man who believed that how you put words on paper said something about your character. It was dated November 1874. 9 months before he died. May. If you're reading this before I've had a chance to tell you myself, then something has happened that wasn't what they'll say it was. I want you to know I was not surprised. I have been expecting it for some time. I made arrangements accordingly. There is a man named Reginald Foss. You know him. Everyone knows him. That is not an accident. He has built his reputation the way other men build fences, deliberately, post by post with the long view in mind. What is underneath that reputation would destroy it. I know what is underneath it because I helped build it once, a long time ago, before I understood what I was building. In 1858, I signed my name as a witness to a land transaction. I was 26 years old and poor, and Foss paid me $50, which was more money than I had seen at one time in my life. I signed and I took the money, and I told myself that powerful men did things like this, and a man like me could not afford to say, no. I have not spent that $50. It is in the tin in the kitchen. I could not spend it. Every time I thought about it, I felt sick in a way that didn't get better. In 1860, I helped a young woman named Constance Aldermore disappear. I did this because I had watched her father get killed, and I knew who had arranged it, and I knew what would happen to her next. I did it also because I was trying, in whatever way I could, to stop building the thing I had helped start. It was insufficient. It did not balance the account. But it was what I could do. What I have been able to do since is keep records. Everything I know about Foss. Everything I have seen or been told or pieced together over 20 years. Names, dates, transactions, witnesses who have since moved away. The original document I signed in 1858 with my own account of how it came to be signed. All of it. It is hidden in the old well on the southwest corner of the property, on a stone ledge 15 feet down. Constance Aldermore knows the spot. If she ever comes back, she will know where to look. If she does not come back, and you are reading this, then you will need to decide what to do with the information I am giving you. I am not asking you to do anything. I would not ask you to take on a risk I created, but I want you to have the choice. Choosing requires knowing, and I kept you from knowing for too long because I was afraid of what it might cost you. Be careful, be brave. They are not the same thing. Your father, Silas Constance, read the letter. Write it again. Set it on the table. She was quiet for a long time. Outside, a crow landed on the fence post near the barn and cawed twice and left. Grit's tail moved once against the floor. He wrote this in 1874, Nora Spud. He died in 1875. Yes, he knew it was coming. He must have, Constance said, or he suspected. Men like Foss, once they decide someone is a liability, they don't leave it indefinite. Nora stood up, walked to the window, looked at the well. He died of a fever, she said. That's what the doctor said. Fast. Complete. He was healthy in the morning and gone by the third day. Arsenic, Constance said. In sufficient quantities, it looks like rapid fever. The symptoms are similar enough that a general practitioner in a rural territory wouldn't necessarily distinguish between them, you think? I think, Constance said carefully. That your father wrote that letter 9 months before he died, and that 9 months is a very specific amount of time to choose if you are just idly writing down your thoughts. Nora stood at the window for a long moment. The mountains were clear. This morning, first snow on the upper peaks, the kind of morning her father used to call a good-looking day, which was his highest form of praise for weather. She thought about him lying on the kitchen floor. She thought about 3 days of fever. She thought about Reginald Foss's letter of condolence, which was kind, she had thought. Idiot, she told herself, not harshly, just clearly. Idiot. The documents in the well, she said. Are they still there? That is why I came, Constance said. I came 3 weeks ago and watched the property. I wanted to be certain no one had found them. When I was satisfied, I climbed down to retrieve them. I had them in my hands when I heard horses on the road. I had to move fast. I secured what I could. The rope gave out when I was getting the last of it. So they're still down there. Some of what I retrieved is with me, in the satchel I had on the ledge. The main documents, your father's compiled record, are still in the hollow on the north side of the ledge, wrapped in the same oilcloth. Your father was thorough. He was, Nora said, a breath. I need to go down and get them. Your ankle is fine, Nora said. I'm going down, not you. Your ankle isn't fine, and you know it. Constance looked at her for a moment, then. The hollow is on the north side of the ledge, left when you're facing the wall, about 18 inches in where the stone curves back. The oilcloth is dark. You might not see it immediately. Feel along the back of the curve, got it. And Nora, she stopped. The tin box, Constance said. Inside the oilcloth there's a tin box, flat. Your father made it himself. That's where the main record is. I'll get it. And, Constance said, and then stopped again, like she was choosing her next words with more care than the others. Your father included his own confession in that box, she said. Everything he did, everything he regretted. He did not remove it or soften it. He believed that the full truth was the only kind worth keeping. She paused. I want you to know that before you read it. So you know it was his choice. Nora looked at her. What kind of man puts his own confession in evidence he's leaving against someone else? She asked. Constance met her eyes. A man who had decided that the truth mattered more than how he looked inside it, she said. Nora got the rope. She rigged it properly this time. Not a rescue loop, but a climbing rig. Tied off to the iron ring and the fence post both. Tested with her full weight before she trusted it. She lit the lantern and lowered it first on a separate cord, letting the light fall down into the dark. Grit sat at the edge of the well and watched everything with the focused attention of a dog who has strong concerns but understands he is not in charge of this particular decision. Stay, Nora told him. He stayed. Barely. She climbed down. The smell of the well rose up around her, cold and old and mineral. Stone that had been wet and then dry and then wet again for 100 years. The lantern swung below her and the shadows moved. 15 feet. Her boots found the ledge narrow. About 2 feet wide at the widest. She pressed her back against the stone wall and breathed the north side. Left when facing the wall. The curve of the stone, 18 inches back. She felt along it with one hand. Cold. Damp at the back and then, there, the texture changed. Something wrapped. Dark oilcloth, just as Constance said. Tied with a cord at both ends. She worked the knots with her fingers in the half-dark. The oilcloth unrolled. Inside, a flat tin box, hand-soldered at the seams. Her father's work, she could tell by the way the joins ran. He had soldered things with that particular tidiness his whole life. Farm equipment, kitchen implements, things that needed to hold. She tucked the box inside her coat, looked around the ledge. Constance's satchel was there too, propped against the wall. Nora grabbed it, settled it across her shoulder. Then she climbed back up hand over hand. Slow, the rope held. When she came over the lip of the well, and her feet touched solid ground again, she stood and breathed for a moment. Grit was on her immediately. Both paws on her knee, checking her over with his nose. I'm fine, she told him. Move. He moved. Slightly. She carried the tin box and the satchel inside. Constance was still at the table where Nora had left her. She had wrapped both hands around the cold coffee cup without drinking from it. Looking at the window, the mountains, she looked at the tin box when Nora set it on the table. Something in her face. Not triumph, not relief. Something older than both those things. Nora sat down. They looked at the box between them. "Open it," Constance said. Nora did. The latch was stiff, but it gave. Inside, wrapped in a second layer of oilcloth, were pages. Many pages. Her father's handwriting, smaller and more compressed than the letter in the fireplace. The writing of someone trying to fit a lot of information into as little space as possible. And beneath the pages, at the bottom of the box, a separate folded sheet. Heavier, different paper. Nora took the pages out first and set them on the table. Constance reached for them, began reading. Her eyes moved quickly, steadily, the way you read something you have been waiting to read for a long time. Nora took the separate folded sheet and opened it. It was the confession. She could tell immediately. The tone changed, less factual, more personal. The handwriting was the same, but the pressure was different. Like a man writing something that cost him. She read it, all of it. Her father had signed a false witness document in 1858 for $50. He had been 26 years old. He had been poor and scared and had told himself the story that people tell themselves about these things. He had regretted it before the ink dried. He had kept the money in a tin in the kitchen as a reminder of what he'd done and a punishment he couldn't stop inflicting on himself. And then he had spent 22 years writing down everything he knew. Every crime, every bribe, every forged document, every name, including his own. Because he had decided at some point in those 22 years that a record with a hole in it was not a record. That the truth had to be complete, or it was just a story someone told to make themselves look good. At the bottom of the confession, after the signature, he'd added a single line. Not in the formal style of the rest. Just, "I kept the $50. It's in the kitchen tin. Use it for what you need." Nora sat back, looked at the kitchen. At the tin on the shelf that she'd always assumed held baking soda, which she'd never opened because she bought her own when she took over the kitchen. She got up and opened it. $50 in coins. Old coins, worn smooth. 22 years of being untouched in a tin in the kitchen. She stood there looking at them for a long time. The knock at the door came mid-morning, 3 knocks. Firm, spaced. The kind that expect to be answered. Grit was off the floor and at the door before Nora had stood up. Not barking, just standing, hackles up. Both ears, somehow impossibly, pointed forward. Nora put her hand on his collar. "Back room," she said to Constance. Quiet. She didn't have to say why. Constance moved. Fast for a woman with a bad ankle. She took the tin box and the satchel with her, without being asked. The back room door closed. Nora crossed to the front door and opened it. Reginald Foss stood on her porch. In 22 years of living near this man, Nora had never disliked him, had never had particular cause to. He was pleasant, consistent. He shook her hand at the bank with genuine warmth and asked about her cattle yields, with what seemed like genuine interest, and he sat in the front pew at church and, the front pew, she looked at him, and all of that rearranged itself in the time it took him to tip his hat. "Mrs. Bassett," he said. "Good morning. I'm sorry to call without warning. I hope I'm not interrupting." 2 men with him, on horses, staying back. Not close enough to be threatening, close enough to be present. Both of them watching the yard with the careful eyes of men who get paid to watch things. Foss himself was on foot, hat in one hand. The posture of a man who is accustomed to people being glad to see him. "Mr. Foss," Nora said. "What can I do for you?" "Some strange business in the county lately," he said. "I've been visiting neighbors, checking in. There's been a woman asking questions about old land records, making accusations. We're concerned about her state of mind." "What sort of accusations?" He smiled. "Patient, practiced. The sort that get told when someone has a grievance and not enough evidence to support it legally. I won't trouble you with the details. The point is, If anyone comes to your property asking questions about your father's dealings, or about land records going back 20 years, I'd appreciate knowing about it." He said your father's dealings like it meant nothing, like it was just a phrase. Nora looked at him, at the silver hair and the expensive coat that no longer read as distinguished, at the two men on horses who were definitely not there, because Foss worried about his personal safety on a Tuesday morning in Nevada territory. "I haven't seen any strangers," she said. "Good." He nodded, looked around the yard. His eyes moved to the old well, registered the disturbed planks, moved on, smooth and unhurried, like a man checking things in a way he didn't want you to notice he was checking. "That old well," he said. "You've been working on the cover?" "Replacing the wood," Nora said. "It was rotting, of course. A hazard in that condition." He turned back to her with a smile. "I won't keep you. Just wanted you to know we're keeping an eye on things for the community. And if you need anything—" "I know where the bank is," Nora said. A small pause. The smile didn't change. "Of course you do," he said. He tipped his hat, walked back to his horse. Mounted with the easy grace of a man who had never not been comfortable, he rode away with his two men flanking him. And Nora stood on the porch and watched him go. Grit pressed against her leg. Warm. Solid. Still watching the road where the horses had been. "I know," she said. He looked up at her. "I know," she said again. She went back inside. Constance came out of the back room. She had heard everything through the window. Of course she had. They looked at each other across the kitchen. "He knows I'm here," Constance said. "He suspects," Nora said. "He doesn't know. There's a difference. A man who knows doesn't send a polite inquiry. He comes with more men and a different tone. He'll come back." "Yes, with both, yes." Nora looked at the table. At the $50 in coins she'd put in a small pile beside the kitchen tin. At the letter in her father's handwriting. "We need to move the documents," she said. "Not the well. Somewhere he won't think to look because he won't know to look. If he searches this house, the smokehouse." Constance said. "It's falling apart." Exactly, Nora thought about it. The old smokehouse at the far end of the property. She hadn't used it in 2 years. The roof had a hole. The door hung sideways. It looked like something she'd given up on. "Nobody searches a building that looks already defeated." "Under the floor," she said. "There's a loose board on the east side, near the back wall. I know because I loosened it myself. That's where I keep emergency money." Constance looked at her. "How much emergency money?" "Not enough for this emergency," Nora said. "Come on." Before he decides polite inquiry isn't getting him anywhere. They moved the documents to the smokehouse together. Nora carried the tin box and Constance carried the satchel, limping, moving faster than her ankle had any right to allow. The morning sun was full now and our yard was exposed, and both of them knew it and moved anyway. The loose board in the smokehouse floor came up clean. Nora had cut the nails on one end years ago so it could be lifted without tools. She put the tin box in. Constance put the satchel beside it. Nora lowered the board. They stood in the half-dark of the broken smokehouse and caught their breath. "What do we do now?" Constance said. Not really a question. Nora looked at the floor. At the board. At the 22 years her father had spent getting to this point, her father's words were somewhere beneath that board now. She didn't need to read them again. She already knew. She stood up straight, all 6 feet and 2 inches of her. "We figure out who we can trust," she said. "And we move fast. Because the one thing Foss doesn't have that we do," she looked at Constance, "is everything he needs to destroy us already being in one place." Grit had followed them to the smokehouse. Of course he had. He stood in the doorway with both ears pointed in the same direction, toward the road, toward the distant sound of something neither of them could quite hear yet. But he could hear it. He always could. "Someone's coming," Nora said. Not a question, Grit confirmed it. She walked out of the smokehouse into the morning light and stood and looked down the road. 3 riders, still distant, moving steadily. No hurry. The unhurried pace of men who know they're going to arrive eventually and aren't interested in making it look like they're in a rush. Nora recognized the silver hair at the front. Foss again. More men this time. Fine, she thought. She straightened her coat, pushed her hair back, stood up to her full height, which had always startled people who weren't expecting it. Giant woman, on 40 acres of Nevada territory, not running, not hiding, just standing waiting to see what came next. 3 riders, coming slow, the kind of slow that means they're not worried about time. Because they own it, because they've always owned it. Because in 22 years nobody in Dullwater County had ever given Reginald Foss a reason to hurry. Nora stood in the yard and watched them come, 6 feet, 2 inches of widow in a work coat. Hair pulled back because she hadn't had time to do anything else with it. Boots unlaced from this morning, still, which was embarrassing. But there wasn't time for that either. Grit pressed against her left leg. Constance was behind her. Back room, door closed. They hadn't discussed it. They didn't need to. Some things you just know. Foss dismounted at the fence line. Same coat as before. Same hat. Same practiced warmth. Like he'd had a few hours to go home and recalibrate, and had come back running the same program. Except this time there were 5 men on horses, not 2. Which was a different kind of message, Mrs. Bassett, he said. I apologize for the second intrusion in one morning. You're not sorry, Nora said, a small pause. The smile held. I've had some additional information since our earlier conversation, he said. We have reason to believe the woman I mentioned, the one making accusations, may have come through your property. Her horse was tracked this direction. I told you I haven't seen any strangers. You did, he nodded. I believe you believed that when you said it. He looked at the yard, at the smokehouse, at the well, back to her. But sometimes people are on a property without the owner's knowledge, hiding, waiting. He said it pleasantly. He said everything pleasantly. That was the worst part. I'd like my men to take a look around, he said. With your permission. No, Nora said. The pleasantness didn't crack. Just adjusted, Mrs. Bassett. This is my property, she said. You come back with a legal warrant and a county judge's signature and I'll consider it. Until then, you and your men are standing on my fence line, and I'd appreciate it if you stayed there. One of the riders, younger, with the impatient face of a man who is used to situation resolving faster, shifted in his saddle, his hand moved near his hip. Grit noticed a sound from him. Low, not a bark, something below a bark. The sound a dog makes when it's moved past warning. The rider went still. Your dog, Foss said, is protective, Nora said, of my property. Like I said, Foss looked at her for a long moment. The calculation behind his eyes was visible, just barely, just for a second. A man adding something up. Deciding the answer wasn't what he wanted yet. Of course, he said, we'll leave you to your morning. He pulled his gloves on, one finger at a time, like a man with all the time in the world. One more thing. The bank has been reviewing your husband's account. There appears to be a note outstanding. Calvin Bassett signed a promissory agreement in the spring of 1877. We've been lenient in light of your circumstances, but I'm afraid the institution does have obligations. He said it the way you might mention the weather. I wasn't aware of any note, Nora said. These things happen, Foss said. Husbands don't always share every business arrangement. I'm sure it was meant to be resolved before. A pause. Respectful. Practiced. Before. He mounted his horse. I'll have the paperwork sent over, he said. 10 days should be sufficient time to make arrangements. Good morning, Mrs. Bassett. They rode away, all 5 of them, unhurried. Like men who had made their point and were satisfied with it, Nora stood at the fence line until they were out of sight. Then she looked down at Grit. Calvin did not sign a note, she said. Grit did not argue. Calvin did not sign a note, she said again. More quietly, to herself mostly, because saying a thing out loud twice was how she made it solid. She walked back inside. Constance was already at the table. She had heard everything through the window. Of course she had. The promissory note, she said, is forged, Nora said. Same as everything else he touches. He's setting a deadline. Constance said, 10 days. He doesn't want to wait for the railroad negotiations to play out. He wants the property before this becomes a legal matter he has to manage in public. So he manufactures debt, Nora said, puts me on a clock, and if the clock runs out before I can do anything, he forecloses, Constance said, legally, with the county sheriff's signature. And everything your father documented becomes the concern of a woman who no longer owns the land it concerns. Nora pulled her chair out and sat down hard, like her legs had made a decision without asking. She stared at the table. The coins from the kitchen tin were still sitting there in their small pile. $50, 22 years old. Every one of them a sentence in a letter her father had written without words. She looked at them and thought about her father dying on this floor. 3 days of fever. Nobody with him because she'd been in the next town buying seed. And then she thought about Calvin. Calvin, who had died in a mining accident 3 years ago. Caught in a collapse, they said. Wrong place. Bad luck. The mine owner had been apologetic and paid for the funeral, and that was the end of it. Wrong place. She'd believed that. She'd believed it because she had no reason not to. Because grief is exhausting, and conspiracy exhausting, and sometimes a person only has enough left in them to bury someone and keep moving. But now she was sitting at this table with a tin of $50, and a woman who'd been dead for 20 years, and a note in Calvin's name that Calvin had never signed. And she thought, Calvin found the well, not the documents. He didn't know about those. But the well, the old sealed well that she'd always been meaning to look at and never had. Calvin had found it, or found the survey maps in her father's papers, or put the pieces together some other way. And he'd gone to someone about it, not to sell. Calvin would never have gone to sell. But he might have gone to confront, to warn. To say, I know what you want. I know what's underneath this property. Stay away from it, which was brave. And foolish, and exactly the kind of thing Calvin Basset would do. She put her hand over the coins, covered them. Tell me about my husband, she said. Constance was quiet for a moment. What do you know about how died, she asked. Mining accident, Nora said. Collapse, spring of 1877. Where was the mine? East Ridge. Devereaux operation. They were pulling silver. Calvin didn't work mines, Constance said. Not unkind. Just careful. No, Nora said. Did he have any business with the Devereaux operation? Not that I knew of. Did he have any reason to be on the East Ridge in April of 1877? The silence stretched. Nora knew the answer. She'd always half known the answer. She just never let herself finish the thought. No, she said. He didn't. Constance folded her hands on the table. The spring of 1877 was the same spring that the preliminary railroad surveys were being conducted, she said, quietly, off the official record. I know this because I've been tracking it from California for 2 years. The surveyors were contracted through a company, Foss Controls. They needed water access assessments for the route, which means someone was looking at your well. And Calvin noticed, Nora said. Calvin noticed, Constance agreed. Nora stood up, walked to the window, looked at the yard, the well, the barn, the smokehouse at the far end, with its sideways door and its hole in the roof. She thought about Calvin, who was a tall man, with a good laugh and a tendency to whistle while he worked, and who had never in their 8 years of marriage walked away from something he thought was wrong. She thought about him going to the East Ridge. She thought about what it meant that he went there. She thought about what it meant that he didn't come back. She did not cry. She would cry later, privately, when this was finished. Right now she turned around and looked at Constance Aldermore, who had been carrying this kind of loss for 20 years and was still sitting upright in a kitchen chair on a sprained ankle. All right, Nora said. 10 days. We need to get the evidence to a federal judge before Foss can execute on that note. Who do we contact? The Territorial Marshal's office in Carson City, Constance said. I sent a letter before I left California. Told them I would have documentation ready when I arrived. They should be expecting some kind of follow-up. Should be, Constance confirmed, which was honest at least. The telegraph office in Dullwater, Nora said. We send a wire. Foss will know within an hour. He has a relationship with the operator, then not Dullwater, Nora thought. Millhaven, 12 miles west, small office, different county. 12 miles is a half-day ride, Nora said. I've done it faster, Foss's men. I know the back way, Nora said, along the creek. You can't see it from the road. Calvin used it for hunting. Nobody knows that route except me and maybe the coyotes. Constance looked at her. You can't leave me here alone, she said. I know. Nora looked around. There's a man in town. Harwick Odom. He runs the blacksmith shop. Foss foreclosed on his grandfather's property in 1865, and Harwick has been publicly unpleasant about it for 15 years. He's the only person in Dullwater County who talks openly about disliking the man. A grudge doesn't make someone trustworthy. No, Nora said, but a specific documented 15-year grudge with no financial benefit to staying quiet suggests someone who decided a long time ago that dignity mattered more than convenience. That's close enough to trustworthy for this week. Constance considered that. He'd need to come here, she said. He would, and be seen. Yes. A pause. Well, Constance said, I suppose we'll find out what he's made of. Before any of that, before Harwick, Odom, and Millhaven, and 12 miles along. The creek, before any of the next steps, Nora needed to look at what was in the tin box. She'd opened it. She'd seen her father's pages. She'd read the confession, but she hadn't read the full record. 20 years of documentation, names and dates and transactions, the architecture of what Foss had built, and how he'd built it. She needed to understand it before she could use it. So she sat at the kitchen table after Constance went to lie down, ankle elevated, as instructed, and she spread the pages out. And she read. For 2 hours, she read. Her father's handwriting was small and precise, and it marched across, page after page, in straight, even lines. No crossings out. He'd written clean copies. He'd been drafting these in rough, she realized, and then making clean versions for the record, because he understood that smudges and corrections suggested doubt, and doubt was the enemy of evidence. The first section was the Aldermore transaction, detailed, year by year. The forged documents, the names of the men who had signed as witnesses, some of whom Nora recognized, 2 of whom were still in the county. Her father's own witness statement from 1858 was there, with his account of how Foss had approached him and what he'd been paid and what document he'd signed and what it had done. He hadn't softened it. He'd written himself as clearly and unflatteringly as he'd written anyone else. Because he was making a record, not an excuse, the second section was everything after. 12 properties, 12 families. The Aldermore operation was the first and the largest, but it wasn't the last, not by a long way. The Morrison family in 1863, the Petrie brothers in 1866, the Kowalczyk homestead in 1868, each one with its specific mechanism, forged signatures, adjusted surveys, manufactured debts, sometimes an accident at a convenient time. The accidents were documented separately in a section her father had titled, in his neat handwriting, simply, Deaths. Nora read that section last. It was 7 pages long. Harold Aldermore, 1860. Riding accident. Nora's father had noted the horse's behavior afterward. Too calm. A horse that had genuinely spooked would have shown signs. This one had come back to its stable and eaten normally. 3 others between 1860 and 1874. All male landowners. All with water rights or access routes or something Foss needed. All dead in ways that looked like accidents or illness. Silas Basset, 1875. The last entry. Her father writing about himself in the same tone he used for everyone else. I believe Foss became aware of this record in October 1874, when Clem Whitaker came to my property on an unannounced visit and spent considerable time in the barn while I was working in the south field. I did not connect this to Foss immediately. In retrospect, this was naive. Whitaker has been doing Foss's information gathering for at least 4 years. I do not know what Whitaker found or did not find, but 6 weeks after the visit, Foss sent a bottle of whiskey as a neighborly gift. I accepted it, because refusing it would have signaled that I suspected something, which would have accelerated whatever he had planned. I noted the date and the gift, and I am noting it here. If something happens to me and this record is found, the whiskey should be understood as the mechanism. Nora read that paragraph 3 times. Whitaker, Deputy Clem Whitaker, who had been Calvin's friend, who had come to the funeral and stood at the graveside and put his hand on Nora's shoulder and said, "If you need anything, anything at all, you know where I am." Who had been doing Foss's information gathering for at least 4 years. Her father had written that in 1874, which meant Whitaker had been working for Foss since at least 1870, which meant Calvin went to someone in 1877. When Calvin figured something out and needed to talk to someone he trusted, she put the page down, picked it up again, put it down. Grit put his chin on her knee. She looked down at him. "I went to Whitaker," she said. "When Calvin died, I went to him because he was Calvin's friend, and I needed someone to help me file the accident report, and he helped me do it." Grit's tail moved once. "He helped me file the accident report," she said. She thought about the graveside, about the handkerchief Whitaker had handed her without looking at her directly. Like a man who couldn't quite meet the eyes of what he'd done, she'd thought it was grief. Maybe it was. Maybe both things were true at once. The thing about a thing you already knew somewhere deep down was that hearing yourself say it out loud was like stepping on a floor you'd been testing for a while and feeling it finally give, not falling. Just the floor giving. "Okay," she said to herself, to the dog, to the room, "okay." She didn't go to Whitaker. Obviously, she didn't go to Whitaker. Instead, she saddled her horse before dawn the next morning, left Constance with the shotgun, and strict instructions about not answering the door, and a pot of beans on the stove, because bad situations do not excuse skipping meals. Constance had looked at the shotgun, then at Nora. "I know how to use one," she said. "I assumed." Nora said, "Go." Constance said, "Be back before dark. Working on it." She rode out along the creek route, the back way. Calvin's hunting path. It ran close to the water through scrub oak and sage, and then cut northeast through a dry wash that wasn't visible from any road. The morning was cold. Clear, cold enough to make the sage smell sharp. Grit had tried to follow. She'd made him go back, which was the hardest part of the morning. His expression, one ear up, one flopped sideways. Maximum betrayal. "You're watching the house," she told him. He'd gone back, slowly, with enormous dignity. Millhaven was smaller than Dullwater. One main street, a general store, a feed operation, a church that was also the town meeting hall on weekdays, and a telegraph office that was also the post office, and on the weekends apparently also a barber, based on the faded sign in the window. The operator was a woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair, and the air of someone who had spent 30 years receiving other people's urgent communications and was deeply unimpressed by urgency as a general concept. Her name, according to the sign above the window, was Mrs. H. Polzunov. Nora liked her immediately. She composed the wire carefully. She'd been composing it in her head for the 12 miles along the creek. Short, specific, no room for misinterpretation. Territorial Marshal's Office, Carson City at 10. Any of Variable Marshal, from Nora Bassett. Dullwater. Cankins Aldermore is alive and in my custody. She has documentation of land fraud, forgery, bribery, and multiple deaths spanning 22 years in Nevada territory. Perpetrator is Reginald Foss, First Territorial Bank, Dullwater, also implicated. Deputy T. Whitaker, Dullwater Sheriff's Office. Evidence is secured. I am prechisting immediate dation of federal marshal and notificationed to Circuit Judge Colwell for emergency proceeding. Deadline is 10 days. Please respond through Millhaven Telegraph Office. She passed it through the window. Mrs. Polzunov read it once. Without expression, "This is a serious allegation," she said. "Yes," Nora said. "Against Reginald Foss." "Yes." "Of Dullwater." "Yes." A pause. "I know 3 families in Millhaven who lost property to that man's bank," Mrs. Polzunov said. Different mechanisms. Same result. She looked at the wire, then at Nora. Priority transmission, she said. I'll send it twice to make sure it goes through. How much? Nothing, Mrs. Polzanov said. Consider it a professional courtesy. She paused. From one woman in Nevada Territory to another. The ride back took longer, not because Nora was slow, because she couldn't go straight back. She circled wide, watched the road from the ridge before she came down. Checked the approach to the property 3 different times from 3 different angles, before she was satisfied that nobody was waiting. Old habit, maybe, or a new one. A week that had rearranged something permanent. She got back to the farm in the late afternoon. Constance was at the table with the pages from the tin box spread out in front of her, reading. Making notes on a separate sheet of paper in small controlled handwriting. The shotgun was on the table beside her. The beans were done. Anything happen? Nora asked. A man rode past twice, Constance said, slowly, looking at the property. Which man? I didn't recognize him. Not one of the 5 from this morning. New face, Nora said. Foss is rotating, so nobody gets identified as associated with him. Smart, said. He's had 22 years of practice, Nora said. She sat down, served herself beans because she'd been riding since before dawn and her legs were done arguing with her. Grit came from whatever corner he'd been guarding and put his chin on her boot. Wiser scent, she said. And now we wait to hear back. Mrs. Polzanov said she'd respond the moment she receives anything. How long? Day. Maybe 2. Constance nodded, looked back at her notes. While you were gone, she said, I finished reading your father's full record. So did I. Before I left, a pause. The section called Deaths, Constance said. Yes, Nora said. He documented my father. Yes, another pause. Longer. He documented himself, Constance said. Yes, the word sat there. He wrote himself the same way he wrote everyone else, Constance said. No more sympathy, no more detail. Just the same clarity. That was him, Nora said. He used to say that a scale that tilted for the weigher wasn't a scale. It was a lever. Constance looked at her. I told you he was a good man, she said. You told me he helped you, Nora said. I'm learning the rest. The next morning, Nora went to see Harwick Odom. She walked, not rode. A woman riding to the blacksmith's was notable. A woman walking through town on errands was nothing. She wore her second-best coat, which was nicer than her best coat because her best coat was functionally a barn coat at this point, and she carried a basket as if she was going to the general store, which she was. After Harwick Odom was a large man. 60, maybe a little more. Black hair, gone white at the temples. Arms that were the natural result of 35 years of hammer work. He had a face that had formed opinions about things and kept them. He was reshaping a wagon hitch when Nora came in. He looked up. Mrs. Bassett, he said. Mr. Odom, she said. She put the basket down and looked at him. He looked at her. The hammer went down. This isn't a social call, he said. No, Foss, he said. Not a question. Nora looked at him. What makes you say that? You've got the look, he said. The one people get when they've just found out, something they half knew, and are still a little surprised it's true. He picked up a rag, wiped his hands. Also, 3 of his men have been riding past my shop since yesterday morning, which they've never done before, which means something changed, and the change is in this direction. Nora leaned on the doorframe. I need someone to stay at my property, she said. Present, visible. While I can't be there, I have a guest who can't be left alone and can't be seen by Foss's people. Constance Aldermore, Harwick Odom said. Nora blinked. How? I've been waiting 20 years for someone to do something about Foss, he said. In 20 years you develop theories. Constance Aldermore is the only person who had enough before she disappeared to do real damage. He looked at her steadily. Is she alive? Yes, good, he said. Simple. Complete. You'd be putting yourself at risk, Nora said. Mrs. Bassett, he said. I am 61 years old. My grandfather built his ranch from nothing, and Foss took it, with a forged signature and a sheriff who needed the work. I have been waiting for someone to show up with something real. He put the rag down. Tell me what you need. Harwick arrived at the farm that afternoon. He brought his youngest nephew, a quiet young man named DeWitt, who said almost nothing, but had watchful eyes that noticed everything. And they settled into the barn without discussion. Two men visible on the property was different from one woman alone. Different enough to matter. Constance looked at Harwick Odom for a long moment when Nora introduced them. "You knew my father," Constance said. "I was 12 when he died," Harwick said. "But yes." Everyone knew Harold Aldermore. He was the kind of man you knew. "What do you remember about him?" Constance said, not asking for comfort, just asking. "He paid his workers on time," Harwick said. "In full. Without looking like he was doing anyone a favor. Like it was just what you did." He paused. "There aren't as many men like that as there should be." Constance nodded. That was enough. She didn't need more than that. The response from Carson City came the second morning. Nora was already awake when the boy from Millhaven arrived on horseback, breathless. With the telegram folded in his shirt pocket, she tipped him. He didn't even count it before he turned and rode back. She opened the telegram at the kitchen table with Constance sitting across from her, and Harwick leaning in the doorway. "O. Nora Bassett, Dullwater Kankantee from Territorial Marshal's Office, Carson City received. Constant Aldermore's letter arrived last move. We have been waiting for confirmation. Federal Marshal Gideon Pruitt Dostik today. Estimated Dull waiter 4 days. Shirkwit Judge Caldwell notified. Request you secure all evidence and limit contact with local law until Pruitt arrives. Proceed with caution. Foss has connections. In territorial government, limit knowledge of this correspondence. 4 days." Nora looked at the date in her father's letter. The note Foss had threatened came due in 10 days, 4 days for a marshal to arrive. Plus time to review evidence. Plus time to convene proceedings. It would be close. Very close. 4 days, she said. "We can manage 4 days," Constance said. "We've managed 3 already," Harwick said from the doorway. Except, that evening, Nora went to the Halla Smokehouse to check on the documents. Routine. She'd been doing it morning and evening. Not that she expected anything, just that the habit of checking was better than the alternative. She lifted the loose board, the tin box was there, the satchel was there, and beside them, something that had not been there before. A small piece of paper, folded once, tucked under the edge of the tin box. She picked it up, unfolded it, 4 words in handwriting she didn't recognize. "They know about Millhaven." She stood in the smokehouse for a full 30 seconds, just standing, paper in hand. The hole in the roof letting in a square of late afternoon sky. Someone had been in here, someone who knew where the documents were, someone who was warning her. She walked back to the house fast. Not running. Running attracts attention, but fast. Constance and Harwick were at the table. She put the paper down between them without saying anything. They read it. Harwick's jaw tightened. "Someone was in the smokehouse," Nora said, and left a note instead of taking the documents. "Either they're working for Foss, and this is a threat," Harwick said, "or they're not working for Foss, and this is a warning." "The documents are still there," Nora said. "If it was Foss, they'd be gone. So it's a warning," Constance said. "But from who?" Nora said the 3 of them looked at each other. Grit was in the corner, watching the back door with the focused attention of a dog who has processed a great deal of information today and is preparing to process more. "Someone who knows about the documents," Constance said. "Who knows about Millhaven? Who has access to this property?" She paused, "and who chose to warn instead of report." Nora picked up the paper. "Whitaker," she said. Harwick looked up. "Whitaker is Foss's man," he said. "He is," Nora said. "But he was Calvin's friend before that. And he stood at the graveside. And he handed me a handkerchief without being able to look me in the eye." She paused. "This isn't the handwriting of a man who doesn't have a conscience. This is the handwriting of a man who has one and has been ignoring it for a very long time, and is finally cracking," Constance said. "Maybe. Or it's a trap," Harwick said. "Maybe that too." The next day she went to see Clem Whitaker, not to his office, too visible, too associated with Foss. She went to his house, early, before he left for the day. She knocked on his back door, the kind of knock that says, "I know you're there, and I know you'd rather not answer this, but here we are." He opened it after a long pause. He looked older than she remembered. 3 years, and he'd put a decade on. The face of a man who hadn't slept well for a while. He looked at her. He looked past her at the empty yard. He stepped back to let her in small kitchen, neat. The kitchen of a man who lived alone and had learned to be orderly about it. She put the note on the table. He looked at it. "They tapped the Millhaven wire," he said. "One of Foss's men has a contact at the main line. They know the marshal's coming. Foss is going to move before he arrives." "How did they know?" "I went to Millhaven," Nora said. "One of his men saw you leave the property heading west. Foss had every telegraph office within 30 miles checked that same afternoon. Millhaven was the third one they tried." "How?" Nora said. "How does he move the note?" Whitaker said. "He'll execute the foreclosure early. File it first thing tomorrow. Once the property legally transfers, whatever's on it belongs to him. Evidence taken from his own property by a federal officer is—" He stopped. "It's complicated." "Complicated enough to delay a proceeding," Nora said. "Long enough for things to get lost," Whitaker said. "Long enough for witnesses to become unavailable." He said it like a man who knew exactly how those things worked, because he'd helped make them work. He sat down at his table, put his face in his hands. "Calvin came to me," he said. Nora went very still. "Spring of 1877, Whitaker said. "He came to me. He'd found the old surveys in your father's papers, and he understood what they meant. He came to me because he trusted me. He asked me to help him go to the county judge." He stopped. "I told Foss." The kitchen was very quiet. "I didn't know Foss would." He stopped again. Started again. "I told myself it would just be a warning. That Foss would warn him off. That Calvin would drop it. I didn't know." He looked up. "I swear to God, I didn't know what Foss would do." Nora looked at him for a long time. This man, who had stood at Calvin's graveside, who had handed her a handkerchief without looking at her directly. She understood now why he couldn't meet her eyes. "You've been Foss's man," she said. "For how long?" 1870, he said. "He had something on me. Something I did before I came to Dullwater. Something nobody here knew." He looked at his hands. "He's always collected those. People's worst moments. He finds them, keeps them like other men keep money. And now," Nora said. He looked at her. "And now I'm done," he said. "I've been done since 1877, and I haven't had the nerve to do anything about it. But I'm telling you, tonight he's going to file that paperwork. You need to move faster than he does." "How?" "The county clerk," Whitaker said. "Old Nestor Haig. He's been in that office 40 years, and he has never, in 40 years, done anything irregular. Because Foss wanted it done. He's the one man in county government that Foss has never been able to buy. Because Nestor Haig has nothing that Foss can threaten." He paused. "He'll try first thing tomorrow. Which means you have tonight to put something in Nestor's hands that he has to look at before he stamps anything." "What kind of something?" "Your father's record," Whitaker said. "The land record specifically. The originals. Nestor Haig spent 40 years recording deeds. He knows what a forged one looks like. If he sees those documents before Foss files, he'll flag the whole transaction. Which means it goes to a judge before it goes anywhere else. It goes to Judge Caldwell," Nora said. "Who is already coming," Whitaker said. "Because we told him to." "Yes." The kitchen was quiet again. Nora said. A long pause. "Yes," Whitaker said. "I'll testify to all of it. What I did, what Foss asked me to do, what happened to Calvin." He looked at the table. "I know what that means for me." "It means you go in front of the same judge," said. "Yes." "And you tell the truth about all of it." "Yes." She looked at him, this tired man, in this neat kitchen, the face of a door left open in bad weather for too long. "Okay," she said. She stood up. "Tonight," she said. "After dark. Nestor Haig's house, not his office. I'll come to you first." Whitaker nodded. "And Clem," she said. He looked up. "Whatever Foss has on you," she said. If you tell it yourself in front of a judge, before Foss can use it, it stops being a weapon, she said it simply. Not gently, just factually, because it was a fact. He stared at her for a moment. That's... He started. I know, she said. It's harder than it sounds. It's terrifying, he said. Yes, she said. Most right things are. She was back at the farm by noon. Harwick was out in the yard. DeWitt was on the roof of the barn, fixing something that had needed fixing for 3 months. Because apparently that was what DeWitt did when he had nothing else to do. Constance was at the table, still reading, still making notes. The woman had the endurance of someone who had spent 20 years waiting and intended to use every remaining minute as if it was the one that mattered. Nora sat down, looked at her. Tonight we move, she said. Constance looked up, put her pen down. Tell me, she said. So Nora did. All of it. Whitaker. The timeline. Nestor Haig. What had to happen before morning. Constance listened without interrupting. Which was the gift of a woman who had learned that the most useful thing you can do when someone's telling you something important is to actually hear it. When Nora finished, the afternoon light was gold and level through the kitchen window. Your father trusted the right woman to come back, Constance said, finally. He didn't know if you'd come back, Nora said. He wrote the record anyway. Yes, he wrote it for whoever found it. Yes, he wrote it for me, Nora said. Even though he didn't know it would be me. She looked at the table. He just kept going. In case. The afternoon light stretched long across the floor. Grit put his chin on Nora's knee. She put her hand on his head. In case, she said again. Quieter, because there was something about that. A man writing down the truth year after year without knowing if anyone would ever find it. Not for the reward. Not because he was certain it would matter. Just in case. Because the truth was worth writing down whether or not it was going to be read. She thought that was the bravest thing she'd ever heard of. Braver than anything she was about to do tonight. Though tonight was going to require some bravery too. She straightened up, looked at Constance. After dark, she said. After dark, Constance agreed. And Grit's tail moved once. Decisive. Like punctuation like. Finally. Like. I have been waiting for this part. Dark comes fast in Nevada territory in the fall. 1 minute the mountains are pink, the next they're black, and the Space Queen is about 20 minutes of the most honest light you'll ever see. Everything golden. Everything clear. Every crack and imperfection visible. Nora had always liked that light. Tonight she didn't have time for it. She was saddling her horse by feel in the barn, while Harwick stood at the door watching the road, and DeWitt was on the property's north edge, doing the same. Constance was at the kitchen table with the shotgun and the tin box and instructions that amounted to. Don't open the door for anyone who isn't us. Constance had looked at her when she said that. Go, she'd said. I survived 20 years. I can survive one night, which was true, which did not make it easier to leave. Grit tried to follow. Nora pointed at the porch. He sat down, looked at her. Looked at the road. Fine, his expression said. But I want the record to show I am capable of attending legal proceedings. Noted, Nora said. She rode out. Whitaker was waiting at the edge of his property. On foot, hat pulled low. The posture of a man who had decided something, and was holding the decision in place by sheer will, because if he thought about it too long, he might change his mind. Nora stopped her horse. He looked up at her. You came, he said. Said I would, she said. He nodded, climbed up behind her without another word. They rode toward town, not the main road, the back route, Calvin's hunting path, which felt appropriate somehow. Calvin would have found the whole situation grimly satisfying. She could almost hear him. Clear your throat, Nora. Walk straight in. Don't apologize for existing. He'd said that to her once. Their second year of marriage. She'd been apologizing for something she shouldn't have been apologizing for, and he'd stopped her mid-sentence and said it plainly. She'd been annoyed at the time. She thought about it a lot after he died. She thought about it now. Nestor Haig lived in a small white house 2 streets courthouse, 81 years old. 40 of those years in the county clerk's office. The kind of man who had seen every version of human nature come through a government window and had developed very specific opinions about all of them. His lamp was still lit. Nora had counted on that. Constance had told her that Harold Aldermore had said once that Nestor Haig went to bed at 10 precisely, and not a minute before, and not a minute after, because that was the kind of man he was. She knocked 3 times, firm. A long pause, then the shuffle of someone moving without hurrying. Because Nestor Haig was 81 years old and had long since stopped hurrying for knocks at the door opened. He was smaller than Nora expected, thin, white-haired, eyes behind spectacles that were sharp and unimpressed in the way of someone who has been lied to professionally for 4 decades. He looked at her, looked at Whittaker, looked back at her. "Mrs. Bassett," he said. He knew her. Of course he knew her. He knew everyone. And Deputy Whittaker He checked the watch in his vest pocket. 9:43 in the evening. "I'm sorry for the hour," Nora said. "Are you?" he said. "Not unkind, just precise. I need you to look at something before tomorrow morning," Nora said. "Before Reginald Foss comes to your office." A pause. "Come in," Nestor Haig said. She spread the documents on his kitchen table, the specific pages documenting the Aldermore transaction and the 6 subsequent land transfers, the forged signatures and the adjusted surveys, and the names of the witnesses who had signed them, and the original 1858 document, the one Silas had signed, with Silas's own account of how it came to be signed attached to it. He read. For 20 minutes he read without speaking. His face didn't change much, slight tightening around the eyes when he got to certain passages. A stillness in his hands that meant he was concentrating very hard. Whittaker sat in the chair by the door. Didn't speak. Stared at the floor. Nora stood. Because sitting wasn't an option. When Nestor finished, he put the last page down carefully, aligned it with the others, took his spectacles off and polished them with his shirt, put them back on. "The survey adjustment on the Morrison parcel," he said. 1863. "I remember that filing. It struck me as unusual at the time. The boundary shift was minor enough to fall under standard correction allowances. But it struck me." "Did you flag it?" Nora asked. "I noted it in my personal record," he said, "which is not the same as flagging it formally. Because at the time I had no formal cause for concern. Just," he stopped, "a feeling." 40 years of feelings, Nora said. 40 years of noticing when something is slightly wrong, he said. Which is the whole job, really. Everything else is filing. He looked at the pages. "Reginald Foss has an appointment with my office at 8 tomorrow morning," he said. "He made it yesterday. For a foreclosure filing. Bassett property." He looked at her. "That would be your property." "Yes," she said. "The note being foreclosed on. What do you know about it?" "That my husband didn't sign it," Nora said. Calvin Bassett was a careful man. He kept records of every transaction he made, financial and otherwise. "I have been through every document," he left. "There is no mention of this note. No corresponding loan proceeds. No accounting of where the money went. Because he didn't borrow money he didn't have a use for. And if he had borrowed money, I would know where it went." Nestor looked at her over his spectacles. "And Deputy Whittaker is here because I can confirm the note is fraudulent," Whittaker said. From the chair. Without looking up, "I was present when it was created. I can give you a signed statement to that effect, and I am prepared to testify before Judge Caldwell when he arrives." The kitchen was very quiet. Nestor Haig looked at Whittaker for a long moment. "You were present when it was created," he said. "Yes," Whittaker said, "and you're telling me this now." "Yes," Whittaker said, because a pause, long. Whittaker finally looked up. "Because I'm tired," he said. "And because a woman I should have helped 3 years ago, when her husband died, is sitting at your table at 10 in the evening doing the thing I should have done a long time ago. And because I'd like to be able to live with myself for whatever time I have left." Nestor Haig was quiet. Then he said, "I'll need that statement in writing. Tonight, if you're willing." "I'm willing," Whittaker said, and Mrs. Bassett. These documents. Your father's record, the originals. I'll need them deposited with my office as official evidence, not copies. Originals, they're yours, Nora said. I'll also need your own statement. Signed. Tonight, yes, she said. He stood up, went to the shelf above the fireplace, brought down a ledger and 2 pens and an ink bottle, set them on the table, sat back down. I'll be filing a notice of disputed title on the Bassett property at 7 tomorrow morning, he said. An hour before Foss's appointment, which will trigger a mandatory judicial review before any foreclosure can proceed. He opened the ledger, which means Reginald Foss is going to walk into my office at 8 tomorrow morning, and I am going to have a very precise conversation with him about the nature of county record-keeping. He said it without inflection, the way you discuss a procedure. But there was something in the set of his shoulders, the particular set of a man who has been waiting 40 years to file one specific piece of paper. They were there until midnight. Nora wrote her statement. Whitaker wrote his. Nestor Haig witnessed both and added a formal notation in his office ledger, which he had apparently brought home and was treating as an extension of his office, because to Nestor Haig, the county records were always open. By the time they left, Nora's hand ached from writing. Whitaker was quieter than he'd been going in, the particular quiet of someone who has said the thing they've been afraid to say and is now in the strange empty space on the other side of it. She dropped him at his property. He climbed down, stood for a moment with his hand on the saddle. I'm sorry, he said. About Calvin. I need you to know I'm sorry. Nora looked at him. I know you are, she said. Not forgiveness, not absolution, just acknowledgement. Because that was what was true. He nodded, walked to his door. She rode home through the dark. 4 days. She'd said 4 days when the telegram came. Day 1 had been the telegram and Harwick and the plan. Day 2 had been Whitaker and Nestor Haig and the statements. Days 3 and 4 were the longest 36 hours of Nora Bassett's life. Foss knew something had shifted. He didn't know exactly what. But he came to the farm on day 3 with 5 men and a county survey sheet and tried to walk the property line of the proposed foreclosure while Nora stood at the fence and watched. Harwick stood beside her. DeWitt was visible on the barn roof, not threatening, just present. 3 people who were not going anywhere. Foss looked at the survey. Looked at Nora. There's been a complication with the filing, he said. Pleasant, controlled. But something behind the eyes. A tightness that hadn't been there before, I heard, Nora said. A dispute on the title, he said. Procedural. It'll be resolved quickly. I'm sure it will, she said. He studied her face. You've been busy, he said. I'm a farmer, she said. We're always busy. He looked at the well, the old sealed well with the new cover she'd put on it 2 days ago. New wood, properly fitted. He'd looked at it every time he came. Like a man who knew something was connected to that spot and couldn't figure out what. Mrs. Bassett, he said. Let me be plain, please, she said. Whatever you think you have, he said. Whatever this is, this maneuvering. The county clerk, the title dispute. Whatever arrangement you've made, he stepped slightly closer. I have been operating in this territory for 22 years. I have relationships you can't see and leverage you can't measure. Whatever a widow on 40 acres thinks she can accomplish in a week against that. He stopped. I'm asking you to reconsider. Nora looked at him. At the silver hair, gone slightly less polished in the last 3 days. At the expensive coat. At the warmth that had gone cold at the edges where the calculation showed through. You paid my father $50 in 1858, she said. He kept it in a tin in the kitchen. He could never spend it. He wrote down why. She met his eyes. Everything else you've built, it's all sitting on top of that $50. And I think somewhere you know that. I think you've known it a long time. A pause, the only sound was wind through the sage and one of Foss's horses shifting its weight. Something moved across Foss's face. Not fear, not yet, but the early cousin of it. The recognition that the ground was not quite where he thought it was. I'll see you in court, he said. You will. She agreed. He rode away. Federal Marshal Gideon Pruitt arrived on the afternoon of day 4, not what Nora expected. She'd had some image in her head of a federal marshal arriving. What arrived was a compact man of about 50 in a travel-worn coat with a badge that needed polishing, and the manner of someone who had been dispatched to several hundred urgent situations and had learned that urgency was most useful when it was quiet. He came with 2 deputies, also compact, also quiet. He rode into her yard and dismounted and looked at the property with the assessing eyes of a man immediately mapping exits and angles and positions. Then he looked at Nora. "Miss Bassett," he said. "Marshal Pruitt." She said, "Is Miss Aldermore on the premises?" "She is." "Good." He handed his reins to one of the deputies. "Let's go inside." Constance had been waiting. 20 years she'd been waiting, technically. But specifically, she'd been waiting at that kitchen table since Nora had left 2 nights ago. She'd slept in the chair, Harwick said, a few hours. Then back at the table, reading her notes, reorganizing the pages, like a general reviewing maps before a campaign. When Pruitt walked in, she looked up. He looked at her. A moment passed between them that Nora couldn't quite read. The moment of 2 people who have each been approaching the same problem from opposite directions for years and are now in the same room. "Constance Aldermore," he said. "Yes," she said. "We got your letter 4 weeks ago," he said. "I've been working on what you sent before I came out. The railroad, documentation, the corporate filings." He pulled out a chair and sat down. "You've built a substantial case." "My father built a substantial case," Constance said. She paused. "I just carried it home." Pruitt looked at the pages on the table, at the tin box, at the neat stacks of organized evidence. "Tell me everything," he said, "from the beginning." "Leave nothing out. That," Constance said, "is going to take a while." "I have time," Pruitt said. "And Deputy Haynes is very fast with shorthand." Constance looked at Nora. Nora nodded, and Constance began. The proceedings were set for 2 days later. Judge Caldwell arrived the evening before. 70s, gray beard, a face that had heard everything and maintained its skepticism anyway. He set up in the Dullwater Town Hall, which was also the church on Sundays, and he reviewed documents for 6 hours straight, and then went to bed and came back the next morning, looking as though he'd slept perfectly well, which Nora found both admirable and slightly unnerving. The morning of the proceedings, Dullwater turned out. Nora had not expected that. She'd expected a legal proceeding. Documents, testimony, the machinery of formal process. She had not expected the town, but people had been hearing things for 2 days. Whispers first, then conversations. Information moving through a small town the way water moves through cracked stone, finding every gap, spreading wider than you'd think possible. The Morrison family came. 3 of them. Their son was 40 now, old enough to remember the day his parents got the letter from the bank. Harwick Odom came. Of course. He sat in the front row like a man who had paid for his seat in a different currency a long time ago and was finally here to collect. Mrs. Polzunov from the Millhaven Telegraph Office came. Nobody had told her. She just showed up. Sat in the back, arms crossed, the expression of a woman who had her own reasons. People Nora barely knew. People she'd seen in the general store for years without more than a nod. People whose connection to all of this she wouldn't understand until later, when the full scope of what Foss had done over 22 years became visible in aggregate, because that was the thing about small injustices. Each one was small enough to seem isolated, but put them together in a room, and the room got very full very fast. Foss arrived with a lawyer from Carson City, expensive suit, leather case, the posture of a man who had handled county proceedings before and considered them manageable. He walked in, saw the room, and for just one moment, barely a second, something crossed his face that might have been the beginning of understanding. Then he composed himself and took his seat. Nora sat across from him. She had put on her church coat, dark green. She'd owned it for 6 years. She'd had to let out the shoulders herself, because nothing in the territory was made for her shoulders. She sat in it and looked straight ahead. Constance sat beside her, also straight, also composed. 20 years of waiting had given her a stillness like deep water, the kind that goes down a long way. Whitaker sat behind them, not with Foss, on their side of the room, his jaw set, his hands flat on his knees. Grit was tied to the post outside. He had tried to come in. Nora had put her foot down. He was extremely displeased. Judge Caldwell came in without ceremony, sat down, put his spectacles on. "Let's begin," he said. The testimony took most of the morning. Constance went first. She stood before the judge and she told the story of 1860, her father's death, the forged documents, the visit from Foss, the sheriff who had told her she was confused by grief, the decision to disappear. She told it plainly, factually, in the same voice she'd used in Nora's kitchen, the voice of someone who had rehearsed this 1,000 times and had decided somewhere along the way that the best delivery was no delivery at all, just the truth, as clean and unadorned as possible. Foss's lawyer objected twice. Judge Caldwell overruled him both times with the economy of a man who had heard every legal objection and classified most of them as delay tactics. Then Nestor Haig testified 40 years in the county clerk's office. He was precise, specific. He produced his own personal notation from 1863, the one he'd made when the Morrison survey adjustment struck him as unusual. "You flagged it in your personal record, but not formally," Judge Caldwell said. "I had no formal basis at the time," Nestor said. "I had a feeling, and now? Now I have 22 years of documentation that explains the feeling," Nestor said. The feeling was correct. Foss's lawyer tried to introduce a character statement. Judge Caldwell looked at it, set it down. "I've reviewed the evidence submitted by Marshal Pruitt. We'll move on." Whitaker testified. He stood up and he told what he knew. All of it. Including his own involvement. Including the night Calvin came to him. Including what he'd done with that information. The room was very quiet while he talked, not the quiet of disinterest. The quiet of people listening to something that cost the speaker something to say. People understood that kind of quiet. They knew the difference between a man performing remorse and a man actually experiencing it. You could feel the difference. Foss's lawyer objected to Whitaker's testimony on grounds of self-interest. "He is testifying against himself," Judge Caldwell said. "That's generally considered the opposite of self-interest." The objection was overruled. Nora testified last. She stood and she talked about her father, about finding the letter in the fireplace, about the tin box in the well, about reading 22 years of her father's handwriting, about the $50 in the kitchen tin that he'd kept because he couldn't live with spending it and couldn't live with throwing it away. She talked about Calvin, about the spring of 1877, about what she now understood about what he'd found and who he'd gone to and what had happened afterward. She kept her voice even, because the courtroom wasn't the place for the other thing. The grief was hers. It would keep. She'd tend to it after. But right now what the room needed was facts, clearly stated, in order. With no excess, she talked about the well, about Grit barking, about 3 days of a dog who wouldn't stop, about kneeling in the pre-dawn dark and hearing 3 deliberate knocks from underground and deciding that the thing to do was answer. Judge Caldwell looked at her when she said that. "You went toward the sound," he said. "Yes," she said, "a sound from underground, in the dark. Before dawn, my dog was sure about it," she said. "He's usually right." Something crossed Caldwell's face that might have been the beginning of a smile. Quickly professional again. "Proceed," he said. Then came the moment that broke the room open. Constance had asked to speak again after Nora's testimony, which was unusual. Caldwell allowed it. She stood up. "There is one more witness," she said. "I have not mentioned him until now, because I needed to be certain he would appear. I needed him to choose it himself, without pressure." Foss's lawyer started to object. "Sit down," Judge Caldwell said, not unkindly, just finally. The lawyer sat. Constance looked to the back of the room. Ezra Polk. She said a man stood up 60 years old, give or take, solidly built, the hands of a carpenter. He was sitting in the third row from the back, beside a woman who must have been his wife, who was holding his hand in both of hers, with the concentrated grip of someone keeping another person anchored to a decision. He walked to the front of the room. The room watched him come. He did not look at Foss. He looked at Judge Caldwell. "My name is Ezra Polk," he said. "I have lived in Dullwater for 18 years under that name. Before that, I spent 2 years moving between mining camps in the Eastern Territory, too afraid to settle anywhere. Before that, my name was Idris Fenn. I worked as the night gatekeeper on the Aldermore property. In the summer of 1860, the room had gone absolutely still. On the night of July the 14th, 1860, Ezra Polk said, I was at my post desk on the south gate of the Aldermore property. At approximately 11 in the evening, I saw 4 men enter the property on horseback. I recognized 2 of them. One was Harold Aldermore's foreman, who I later learned had been paid to provide entry. The other," he stopped, took a breath. "His wife, 3 rows back, tightened her hands. The other was Reginald Foss," he said. "I saw Harold Aldermore confront them at the main house. I heard what was said. I saw what happened. I was 19 years old and I was very frightened, and I left the territory the following morning, because I believed I would be the next to die if I stayed." He looked up. "I am 60 years old now," he said. "I have a wife. I have children. I have grandchildren." He paused. "I have not slept without this particular weight since I was 19 years old." Another pause. "I would like to set it down now." The silence in the room lasted a full 5 seconds, which is a long time for silence. Then Foss's lawyer stood up and started talking, and Judge Caldwell picked up his gavel and used it. Foss was given the opportunity to respond. His lawyer spoke at length about reputation and decades of community service and the nature of circumstantial evidence. He said the word circumstantial 4 times in 3 minutes. Foss himself spoke. He stood up and he looked around the room, at the people who had filled it, at the faces he'd been looking at for 22 years, people who had shaken his hand and accepted his donations and sat near him in church. He said, "I built this community." He said it like he believed it, like it was a defense. Like the building of a thing erased the question of what it was built on. The room did not respond warmly, not with anger, not with noise, just with the quiet of people who have recalibrated, who have replaced one version of a person with another version, who are adjusting to the new shape of something they thought they knew. Foss sat back down. His lawyer leaned to him and whispered something. Foss didn't respond. He was looking at the table in front of him. Something had changed in his face. The calculation was still there, but it had run out of variables. It had produced an answer he hadn't anticipated and didn't know what to do with. Judge Caldwell took 40 minutes to review everything. He went into the back room with Marshal Pruitt and his record. Minutes. The room talked and then stopped talking and then talked again. And then someone brought in a pot of coffee from the building next door. And people drank it because 40 minutes was a long time. Nora sat in the front row. Constance was beside her. Neither of them spoke. Harwick Odom sat behind them. He'd brought his hat with him and he was turning it in his hands, around and around. The only sign that anything was moving inside him. Outside, through the wall, Nora could hear grit, not barking, just present, audible. A dog who was tied to a post and was not happy about it but was enduring the situation with whatever dignity remained to him. She was almost grateful for the sound. It was the most normal thing in the room. Caldwell came back, sat down, put his spectacles on. "I've reviewed the evidence submitted by Marshal Pruitt in conjunction with the testimony given this morning," he said. "I am issuing the following preliminary findings." He read from his notes. The forged Aldermore land documents of 1860 were to be treated as fraudulent pending full federal investigation. The Aldermore was to be placed in trust pending adjudication of rightful inheritance. The 12 subsequent land transactions connected to the same documented pattern of fraud were to be individually reviewed. The Morrison family transaction was flagged specifically based on Nestor Haig's 1863 notation as requiring immediate review. The promissory note filed against the Bassett property was to be treated as invalid pending verification of signature. A hold was placed on any foreclosure proceeding. Reginald Foss was to be held in federal custody pending full investigation and formal charges. His brother, Caldwell, paused here, looked at Pruitt, who nodded, his brother Clement Foss, currently in the city of Sacramento, had been detained that morning on separate federal charges related to the railroad land acquisition scheme. Communications from the Meridian Pacific Land and Transit Corporations, submitted as part of Marshal Pruitt's investigation, documented the involvement of both brothers in coordinated acquisition fraud across 3 territories. A name Nora didn't recognize, a corporation she'd never heard of. She looked at Constance. Constance's face was entirely composed. "I found them in California," she said quietly. 2 years ago. The other side of the railroad arrangement. I included everything in the letter I sent to Carson City." She paused. "I thought it was better to let Pruitt develop that angle separately, so that if anything happened to me, that piece was already in motion." "You planned for the possibility that something would happen to you," Nora said. "I planned for several possibilities," Constance said. 20 years of practice." Nora looked at her. This woman, who had been dead for 20 years and spent them building an airtight case from a distance, who had planned redundancies into her own survival. "You're terrifying," Nora said. Constance almost smiled. "Thank you," she said. Foss stood when his name was read in the custody order. He stood and he straightened his coat, buttoned the top button. The gesture of a man reasserting something in the face of everything dissolving. He looked at Nora, not at Constance. Not at the judge, not at the room at Nora. "Your father," he said, "was a man who understood compromise. He understood it was wrong," Nora said. "That's what the $50 was about." A pause. "He was afraid," Foss said. "Yes," Nora said, "and he did the right thing anyway." Which is the whole story. Marshal Pruitt's deputies moved in. Foss went with them, not struggling, not performing dignity, just going, because there was nothing left to perform it for. The room exhaled, not cheers, not dramatics, just the collective release of held breath. Then someone started talking, and then someone else. And then the room was full of the sound of people who had been quiet for a long time and had things to say. The Morrison family found Nora at the back of the room afterward, a woman her own age. 3 children behind her, ranging from teenage to something smaller that was hiding behind its mother's skirt. "My mother said she knew something was wrong," the woman said, "when they lost the land. She said she knew, and nobody believed her. She died believing nobody believed her. I believe her," Nora said. "She's been gone 11 years, the woman said. I believe her anyway," Nora said. The woman looked at her for a moment, nodded once, went back to her children. Outside, untied from his post, Grit launched himself at Nora with the full force of a dog who had been waiting for hours and had decisions to make about it. She caught him, which was impressive given the combined enthusiasm. "All right," she said. "All right," he settled, eventually, into the position of a dog who was maintaining his grievances but willing to be held. She held him. The afternoon light was that golden Nevada light. Late, long, everything clear and cracked and honest. Constance came out. She stood beside Nora and looked at the main street of Dullwater. At the bank building with Foss's name on it. At the church. At the schoolhouse that his donated money had built. "What happens to all of it?" Nora said. "The assets will be reviewed," Constance said. "What was built with legitimate profit stays. What was built with stolen money gets sorted out by people with better legal training than either of us." She paused. "It'll take years, years," Nora said. "Justice usually does," Constance said. "The dramatic part is quick. The paperwork takes forever." Nora looked at the church, the front pew, where Foss had sat every Sunday. He sat in the front pew, she said. Yes, Constance said. Reverend Marsh stood at that pulpit and looked right at him every week. A pause. Yes, Constance said. More carefully, Nora looked at her. The Reverend knew, Nora said. It wasn't a question. Constance was quiet for 3 full seconds. Come walk with me, she said. They walked away from the town hall, away from the crowd, toward the edge of the main street, where the buildings gave way to open land. Grit trotted between them, ears alert, sensing that the conversation had changed register. The night my father died, Constance said, 1860. I told you I saw 4 men. I told you I recognized 2, Foss and the foreman. Yes, Nora said. There was a 3rd man, Constance said. I didn't see his face clearly. It was dark. He stayed back, away from the others. He wasn't there for what happened to my father. He was there for the signing. As a witness, a respectable witness. Someone whose name would lend credibility to the documents. Nora waited. I have spent 20 years trying to confirm who that 3rd man was, Constance said. I had a suspicion. I had fragments of evidence. But nothing I could put in front of a judge until Nora said. Until Idris Fenn walked into that courtroom today, Constance said. He was 19. His eyes were better than mine in the dark. He saw what I couldn't, Reverend Marsh. Nora, Aldous Marsh, Constance said, who arrived in Dullwater in 1859, who was given the church position with significant financial backing from Foss's bank, who has spent 20 years being the most trusted man in the county. She stopped walking, the most trusted man, because that's what Foss needed. Not just money and leverage, he needed respectability. The kind that only comes from a man of God standing behind you. Nora stopped too. She thought about Reverend Marsh, who had married her and Calvin, who had said the words over Calvin's grave, who had baptized the Morrison children, who had counseled half the county through their private worst moments, who had been collecting those moments the way Foss collected leverage, who had been doing it for 20 years. Does Pruitt know? Nora said. He will in about 10 minutes, Constance said. Idris Fenn told me he could identify the 3rd man. I asked Pruitt to speak with him privately after the formal testimony. Nora looked back toward the town hall, at the crowd spilling out, at the ordinary afternoon going on around an extraordinary day. She thought about trust, about what it was built from, about how it was the most valuable thing in a small county and the most dangerous thing in the hands of someone who understood how to manufacture it. How do you build it back? She said. Trust. After something like this, Constance was quiet for a moment. Slowly, she said, and honestly. And one person at a time, she looked at Nora, which is exactly how it should be built in the first place, she said. It's just that we usually don't notice that until after we've seen what happens when someone builds it the other way. Marshall Pruitt found Reverend Marsh that evening, in his study, going over Sunday's sermon. Nora heard about it secondhand, from Mrs. Polzunov, who heard it from DeWitt, who was there when one of the deputies came back. Marsh had been very still when Pruitt came in. He'd been still in the way of someone who had been expecting a knock at the door for 20 years and had decided at some point that keeping the sermon notes tidy was the thing to do while waiting. He'd gone with the deputies without argument. He'd asked to bring his Bible. They let him. 6 days later, the farm looked the same, which was the strangest part. The chickens still needed feeding. The barn still needed its morning round. The list of things a farm required every single day had not shortened itself out of respect for what had happened. Nora found that comforting. Constance was in the guest room that used to be Nora's sewing room. Her ankle was better. She could walk without the stick now. She was going to need to make decisions soon. About the Aldermore property. About what came next. About who she was. Now that she was allowed to be herself again. But that was tomorrow's problem. Today was just a morning. Nora sat at the kitchen table and looked at the coins, the $50, still there. In their small pile, her father had kept them as punishment, as memory, as the physical weight of a wrong he couldn't undo. She understood that. She understood why he'd done it that way. But he was gone now, and the punishment had served its purpose. It had kept him honest for 30 years. It had kept him writing. It had kept him building the record that had brought her to this table. The $50 had done what it needed to do. She thought about the Morrison woman. 3 children behind her. A mother who had died believing nobody believed her. She put the coins in her coat pocket. She'd figure out the right thing to do with them. There were families. There were people who had lost things they shouldn't have lost. It was a small amount of money against a very large injustice. But you started somewhere. You started with what you had. The railroad company sent a lawyer 3 weeks later. Polished boots. Leather case. He made an offer for the water rights. Nora let it sit in the air for exactly 10 seconds. No, she said. He offered more. No, she said. Mrs. Bassett, the railroad, can rent it, she said. Not buy it, annual compensation. My land stays mine. She stood up. Coffee, while you think about it? He blinked. He stayed for an hour. He did not get what he came for. He got something better, though he wouldn't know that for 6 months. The agreement was signed 4 weeks later. Filed with Nestor Haig, who witnessed it with the quiet satisfaction of a man doing exactly the work he was born to do. Nora kept her copy in the tin box, her father's tin box, with the flat lid and the careful seams. The $50 were already gone, divided among the families with pending claims, small amounts against a large injustice. But you start somewhere. You start with what you have. Harwick came by that morning. He didn't knock. He just appeared in the barn door, the way people did when they'd been to your property, enough times to stop treating it like an occasion. He looked at Nora. She looked at him. My grandfather's land, he said. I know, she said. The proceedings are going to include it? Pruitt said. All 12 documented transactions, she said. Yours is the 4th one, he nodded. He turned his hat in his hands. Around and around. I spent 30 years angry, he said. At Foss. At the system. At the county and the bank and the whole arrangement. He paused. It was right to be angry. But it was also heavy. 30 years of carrying something heavy. Yes, Nora said. Your father carried it too, he said. Different kind. But heavy. Yes, she said. I don't know what to do without it, he said. Simply, without embarrassment. Just stating a fact about himself. The anger, it's been the engine for so long. Now I don't know what runs the engine. Nora thought about that. About what comes after. When the thing you've been working toward is done, and the work is done, and the space it leaves is unfamiliar. I imagine you find out, she said, what else you are. He looked at her. That's what your father did, he said. Found out what else he was. He spent 22 years finding out, she said. Is that enough time? She looked at the barn. At the light coming through the gaps in the planks. At the hay bale that needed moving. And the feed that needed checking. And the list of things a farm required every single day, regardless of what was happening anywhere else. I think it takes as long as it takes, she said. Harwick nodded, went back to turning his hat, then stopped. DeWitt wants to fix your roof, he said. The barn roof. The section over the east stall. He noticed it's been patched wrong, it has, Nora admitted. Calvin patched it, and he was not a natural carpenter. DeWitt is, Harwick said. It won't take long. If you'll have him, send him over, she said. He put his hat on, walked back out into the morning. Constance came outside around midday. She walked without the stick, slowly, but without it, testing the ankle against the uneven ground of the yard. Nora was at the well, the old well, with its new cover, standing at the edge of it the way she'd been standing 10 days ago, when all of this started. When Grit started the whole chain of events by refusing to be wrong, Constance came and stood beside her. They looked at the well. I thought about it, down there, Constance said, while I was on the ledge. 3 days. I had a lot of time to think. What did you think about? Whether I'd done the right thing, Constance said. Coming back, risking this, risking you specifically, because I knew when I chose your property that I was choosing you, too. You didn't know it. But I did. You chose correctly, Nora said. I know that now. Did you doubt it at the time? On the second day, Constance said. The second day, I was on that ledge and the ankle wasn't getting better, and the dog wasn't stopping, and I thought, what if nobody comes? What if 20 years was long enough for the daughter to be gone? What if I've done this and it means nothing? And then the third morning, and then your dog got louder, Constance said. Which somehow, she stopped, which somehow felt like an answer. Grit, from across the yard, appeared to hear his name in the conversation without it being spoken. He trotted over, sat between them, looked up at the well as if checking whether it needed further attention. He seemed satisfied, tail moving in the slow, easy way of a dog who has completed a significant project and knows it. 20 years, Nora said. Yes. And you still came back. I couldn't. Constance stopped. Started again. I couldn't let it be the end of the story. What happened to my father? What happened to this land? What happened to your father? She looked at the well. A story that ends with the wrong people winning and everyone else staying quiet is not a story. It's just a crime. Nora looked at the mountains. First snow on the upper peaks again. Second time this week. Winter was coming. A lot of winters had come and gone while her father wrote his record in the dark. A lot of winters while Constance learned to exist under someone else's name. A lot of winters while Harwick carried his anger and Whitaker carried his guilt and Ezra Polk carried his secret, and everyone in Dullwater County sat in that church and shook hands with him who understood. That warmth was a currency. But here was this morning, here was this light. Here was a woman who had been dead for 20 years, standing beside a well that held the records of a man who had spent his life trying to make one right choice after one wrong one. He was going to try, Nora said. My father, he wrote that he was planning to turn over the evidence. Before he died, he just ran out of time. He didn't run out of time, Constance said. He passed it on. Nora looked at her. He passed it to the right person, Constance said. He just didn't know her name yet. The last evening, October, late, the mountains full dark. The sky that specific cold Nevada black that had more stars in it than seemed reasonable. Nora was at the well. She went there sometimes in the evenings. Not for any particular reason. Just, it was where things had changed. It felt like the right place to stand and think. Grit was beside her. He sat at the edge of the well and looked down into the dark with the expression of a dog, reviewing a past accomplishment. Satisfied. The kind of dog who does not take credit casually, but also does not refuse it when it's earned. You started all of this, Nora said. He wagged his tail once. 3 days, she said. 3 days you stood here and barked, and I thought you'd lost your mind. He looked at her, the one ear up, one ear sideways face, which she'd decided over the past weeks wasn't a defect of genetics or an accident of anatomy. It was just how he listened. One ear to what was obvious. One ear to what was underneath. She put her hand on his head. He leaned into it. All 40 pounds of gray dog pressing against her leg in the cold Nevada evening. She thought about her father writing his record in the dark, about Constance on a stone ledge for 3 days in a sealed well. About Calvin walking into a meeting he didn't walk back from. About Ezra Polk carrying a name that wasn't his for 40 years. About Whitaker sitting in the chair by the door with his hands on his knees and finally saying the thing that had been sitting in his chest since 1877. About Nestor Haig and his 40 years of feelings. About Harwick Odom turning his hat. About Mrs. Polzunov, who showed up for her own reasons and didn't explain them. About all the people who had known something was wrong and stayed quiet, and the smaller number who had known something was wrong and hadn't. About what the difference was between them. She thought it might just be timing, or exhaustion, or the right knock at the right door, or a dog who wouldn't stop barking. The last golden light was gone. Just stars now and the sound of the sage in the wind. She straightened up, 6 feet 2 inches, in her work boots hands that could haul a hay bale. 40 acres of Nevada territory. One well, her father's tin box in the house, with her copy of the railroad agreement inside it. And one other thing. not the letter from the fireplaces. The one from inside the tin. Her father's confession. The one that started, "May, I need to tell you something about what I did before I was your father." She'd kept it, because it was the most important document in the box. More important than the evidence. More important than the testimony. It was a man being completely honest about himself, in a tin box, underground, with no guarantee anyone would ever find it. That took more courage than anything else in the record. She kept it. She looked up at the mountains, at the stars over them, and she thought, "Be careful, be brave. They are not the same thing." He was right. They weren't the same thing at all. But she was starting to understand that you could practice one until it made room for the other. She turned and walked back toward the house. Grit fell into step beside her, solid, warm, one ear up, one sideways. Both of them listening, both of them going home.